Rain tapped gently against the windows of the Book Nook Cafe on that autumn evening in Boston. Chen Lai, wearing his usual designer suit that barely hinted at his tech millions, hadn't planned to stay. He only ducked in to escape the weather while his driver fixed a flat tire. The small coffee shop was packed, with people sitting cross-legged on cushions scattered across the floor, their faces turned toward a small wooden stage. That's when he first saw her. Amara Taylor stood confidently at the microphone, her curves wrapped in a flowing purple dress that caught the soft lighting. Her voice carried through the room as she shared poems about growing up in a world that often tried to make her feel small. But there was nothing small about her presence. She filled the room with warmth and wisdom that made everyone lean in closer. Chen found himself sinking into an empty armchair, forgetting about his waiting car outside. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so captivated by someone's words. Between poems, she laughed with the audience, sharing little stories that made everyone feel like old friends. Her eyes sparkled when she smiled, and even from across the room, Chen could see the intelligence behind them. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from his business partner asking where he was, reminding him about their dinner meeting at some overpriced restaurant. But for the first time in years, Chen didn't care about a business obligation. He silenced his phone and listened. After the reading, people gathered around Amara. But Chen held back, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his three-piece suit among the casual crowd of artists and students. He was used to commanding attention in boardrooms and tech conferences. But here, watching her chat animatedly with her admirers, he felt strangely nervous. His friend Robert spotted him from across the room. They were supposed to meet at that fancy dinner, and made his way over. "What are you doing here?" Robert whispered, glancing around the cafe with barely concealed disdain. "This isn't exactly your scene." Then he noticed where Chen was looking, and his eyebrows shot up. "Oh no, don't even think about it. Your mother would have a heart attack." But Chen wasn't listening. Amara had just looked up, and their eyes met across the room. She gave him a curious smile, probably wondering what this overdressed stranger was doing in her cozy coffee shop world. Instead of looking away, Chen smiled back. Robert tugged at his sleeve, muttering something about their reservation, but Chen shrugged him off. He'd spent his whole life meeting other people's expectations, running the right companies, dating the right women, living in the right neighborhood. But watching Amara laugh with her friends, genuine and unguarded, he realized how tired he was of right by everyone else's standards. Taking a deep breath, Chen straightened his tie and walked toward the small group around Amara. He could feel Robert's disapproving stare, could already imagine the gossip that would spread through his social circle. The tech wonder kid, heir to one of Boston's most prestigious families, approaching a plus-size black poet in a quirky coffee shop. It would be all over their private chat groups by morning. But with each step, Chen felt more certain. When he finally reached her, Amara turned those bright eyes on him, and he forgot every practiced line he ever used. Instead, he simply said, "Your words made me feel less alone tonight. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Maybe right here." The genuine surprise and warmth in her smile told him he'd said exactly the right thing, even as he heard Robert's exasperated sigh from across the room. Neither of them knew it yet, but that rainy evening in a crowded coffee shop was about to change both their lives forever, and prove that sometimes the best love stories start when we stop listening to everyone else's opinions about who we should love. Word spread fast in Boston's elite circles. Within days of Chen and Amara's first coffee date, his phone was buzzing with concerned messages from family friends. His mother called every morning with suggestions about lovely girls from suitable families she'd love him to meet. But Chen hadn't felt this happy in years, and he wasn't about to let anyone's disapproval change that. Their second date turned into a third, then a fourth. They spent hours talking about everything. Her dreams of opening a publishing house for underrepresented voices, his secret wish to use his tech knowledge for something more meaningful than just making money, In Amara's tiny apartment, filled with books and the smell of jasmine tea, Chen felt more at home than he ever had in his luxury penthouse. But not everyone shared their joy. During a board meeting at his company, Chen overheard two investors whispering in the hallway. "He must be going through some kind of crisis," one said. "First dropping our biggest client because of their ethics issues, and now this relationship. His father would be so disappointed." The words stung, but they also made Chen realize how much he'd changed since meeting Amara. He was finally making decisions based on his heart, not his bank account. Amara faced her own battles. At a literary event, she overheard someone say, "She must be after his money. Why else would someone like him be with?" The sentence trailed off, but the meaning was clear. That night, she tried to give Chen an out. "Your life would be easier without all this drama," she said softly. But Chen just pulled her closer. "My life would be empty without you in it," he replied, and he meant every word. The whispers followed them everywhere. At fancy restaurants, hosts would assume Amara wasn't with Chen and try to seat them separately. At tech conferences, people would talk to Chen while completely ignoring Amara, despite her impressive knowledge of the publishing industry. Some of Chen's oldest friends stopped inviting him to events, sending thinly veiled messages about maintaining certain standards. Through it all, Amara remained graceful but strong. When Chen's mother finally invited them to dinner, wearing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, Amara charmed everyone except her with stories about her work with young writers. Even the family butler had to hide a smile at her quick wit. But Mrs. Li's only response was a cold, "How interesting," before changing the subject to her country club friends' daughters. The real turning point came during a charity gala. Chen's business partner had helpfully seated them at different tables. But when Chen stood to give his donor speech, he walked to Amara's table first, took her hand, and led her to the stage with him. "My success means nothing without someone to share it with," he said into the microphone, looking straight at her. "And I've finally found that someone, even if she's not who everyone expected." The room fell silent, then burst into applause, some genuine, some merely polite. Later that night, scrolling through his phone, Chen found several board members had threatened to pull their investments. His mother had sent a long message about family obligations and maintaining their social standing. But sitting on his cozy couch, watching Amara grade her students' poetry assignments with reading glasses perched on her nose, he realized something important. For the first time in his life, he was truly free. Free from expectations, free from pretense, free to love someone who made him want to be a better person. He took a picture of that moment. Amara concentrated on her work, her natural hair caught in the soft lamplight, surrounded by papers and coffee cups. This was real life, real love, and no amount of society gossip could touch what they were building together. Looking at her, Chen knew, sometimes the biggest risk you can take is choosing happiness over acceptance. And sometimes that risk brings the greatest reward of all. 6 months into their relationship, Chen started planning a perfect proposal. He'd thought about doing it at an expensive restaurant or during a luxury vacation, but those places didn't feel right. Their love story had started in that small coffee shop, and that's where it needed to take its next big step. The book Nook Cafe hadn't changed much. Same mismatched armchairs, same coffee-stained poetry books on shelves, same warm lighting that made everyone look like they were glowing from within. Chen spent weeks working with the cafe owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Patel, to set everything up just right. On the night of the poetry reading, Amara had no idea what was coming. She was scheduled to perform, just like she did every month. The room was packed, but this time with a mix of familiar faces from the cafe and some surprising additions. Students from her writing workshop, authors she'd helped publish, and even a few of Chen's business friends who'd come to accept their relationship. Chen sat in the same armchair where he'd first watched her perform, his heart beating so fast he could barely breathe. The ring box felt heavy in his pocket, not because of the diamond inside, but because of what it represented. He'd chosen it carefully, working with a local artist to create something unique, just like their love story. When Amara stepped up to the microphone, she noticed something different. Instead of her usual spot on stage, there was a small table with a book on it. "This is a special edition," Mrs. Patel told her with a knowing smile. "Why don't you read from it?" Opening the book, Amara found something unexpected. It was filled with pictures, snapshots of their time together. Her teaching Chen to make her grandmother's banana bread recipe, and the hilarious failed attempts. Chen falling asleep surrounded by her poetry books as he tried to learn more about her passion. The two of them laughing in the rain after a canceled outdoor concert, dancing to music only they could hear. As she turned the pages, her voice grew softer with emotion. The last page held a simple question. "Will you write the rest of our story with me?" That's when Chen stood up. The room fell silent as he walked to the stage, no longer the nervous businessman in an expensive suit, but simply a man in love. He didn't care that his hand was shaking or that his carefully prepared speech had completely vanished from his mind. "Everyone told us we didn't make sense," he said, taking her hand. "That we came from different worlds, that it wouldn't work. But they didn't understand that you are my world now. You taught me that real love isn't about fitting someone else's expectations. It's about becoming the best version of yourself with someone who believes in you completely." Kneeling down, Chen pulled out the ring box. But before he could open it, Amara was already nodding, tears streaming down her face. The cafe erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Patel was crying into her apron, and even some of the regular customers who'd watched their love story unfold were wiping their eyes. The local gossip columns got hold of the story the next day. "Tech millionaire's unusual proposal," read one headline. "Society's most unexpected engagement," declared another. But for once, the comments weren't cruel. Something about their genuine love had touched people's hearts. Messages of congratulations started pouring in, even from some unexpected sources. That night, curled up on Amara's old couch, they scrolled through the hundreds of supportive messages on social media. "Maybe we're changing more than just our own lives," Amara said softly. Chen kissed her forehead, looking at the simple but elegant ring on her finger. It caught the light just right, like their future, bright and full of promise. They'd proven that when love is real, it doesn't need society's approval to shine. Their story was just beginning, and they were ready to write every chapter together, no matter what anyone else had to say about it. The wedding planning brought out the best and worst in everyone. Chen's mother insisted on a huge celebration at the city's most expensive hotel, while Amara dreamed of something more meaningful. They eventually chose the botanical gardens, where nature's beauty wouldn't overshadow their love story. The guest list became a source of tension. Some of Chen's relatives sent back their invitations with notes about maintaining family honor. His mother's friends suddenly had prior commitments on that date. But for every person who declined, someone unexpected stepped up to support them. Mr. Wong, Chen's old math teacher who'd encouraged his love of technology, offered to officiate the ceremony. Mrs. Patel and the entire coffee shop crew insisted on catering the dessert table with their famous pastries alongside the professional caterers. Amara's writing students volunteered to handle the decorations, filling the garden with handwritten poems about love tied to flowering branches. On the morning of the wedding, rain threatened to ruin their outdoor plans. Amara stood at the window of her bridal suite, watching dark clouds gather. Her white dress, designed by a local seamstress who'd become a dear friend, hugged her curves perfectly. Her mother, who'd raised her alone and taught her to be proud of who she was, helped adjust her veil. "Maybe the rain is a blessing," her mother said softly. "In our culture, rain on your wedding day means your marriage will be strong enough to weather any storm." Just then, the sun broke through the clouds, creating a stunning rainbow over the gardens. Chen waited beneath an arch of roses his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his bow tie. Some of his board members had shown up after all, standing awkwardly in their designer suits next to Amara's vibrant community of artists and students. But when the music started and Amara appeared at the end of the aisle, everyone's differences seemed to fade away. She walked toward him with such grace and confidence that several guests were moved to tears. Chen's mother, sitting in the front row, finally saw what her son had seen all along. Not just Amara's outer beauty, but the inner light that made her truly special. During the ceremony, they shared vows they'd written themselves. Amara spoke about finding love that didn't try to change her, but celebrated her exactly as she was. Chen talked about learning that real success wasn't measured by bank accounts or social status, but by the courage to follow your heart. Mr. Wong added his own words of wisdom. In my 40 years of teaching, I've learned that the best solutions often come from unexpected combinations. These two prove that love doesn't need to follow a formula to be perfect. The reception was a beautiful mix of cultures and traditions. Chen's favorite Chinese dishes were served alongside soul food recipes from Amara's family. The coffee shop's pastries disappeared faster than the expensive wedding cake. People who might never have met otherwise found themselves sharing tables, swapping stories, and discovering common ground. Even some of those who'd initially rejected their relationship seemed touched by the genuine joy of the celebration. Chen's mother was overheard telling her friends, "My son looks happier than I've ever seen him." A few of his business associates who'd been skeptical were seen asking Amara about her work in publishing, genuinely interested in her perspective. As the evening wound down, Chen and Amara shared a quiet moment in the garden. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees around them, and distant laughter carried from the reception. "Look what we did," Amara whispered, gesturing to the diverse group of people mingling and celebrating together. "We didn't just have a wedding. We built bridges." Chen held her close, remembering that rainy night in the coffee shop where it all began. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We're going to keep building bridges together." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by people who'd chosen love over prejudice, they knew they'd created something truly magical. Not just a wedding, but a testament to love's power to transform hearts and minds. After their honeymoon, Chen and Amara didn't just settle into married life. They decided to shake things up in both their industries. It started with a late-night conversation over takeout in their new home, where modern tech met cozy bookshelves. "I'm tired of seeing the same stories from the same kinds of people," Amara said, surrounded by manuscript submissions from her literary agency. "There are so many amazing writers out there who never get a chance because they don't fit the traditional mold." Chen looked up from his laptop, where he'd been working on his company's latest app. "You know what? I'm tired of tech being just about making money. What if we combined our skills to do something different?" That conversation sparked an idea that would change both their lives and many others. They decided to create a new kind of publishing platform, one that would use technology to help underrepresented voices reach readers directly. The first few months were tough. Chen's board members were skeptical about investing in publishing, an industry they saw as dying. Some of Amara's literary contacts worried about mixing traditional publishing with tech, but they pressed on, working late into the night from their home office. Their first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young writer from a small town had been rejected by every major publisher, despite her brilliant storytelling. Through their platform, her book about growing up as a child of deaf parents became an overnight success. Suddenly, people started paying attention. Chen brought his tech knowledge, creating algorithms that helped match readers with diverse stories they might never have discovered otherwise. Amara used her literary expertise to ensure quality and provide support to emerging writers. Together, they built something neither could have achieved alone. Their office became a place where differences were celebrated. Their team included people from all backgrounds: experienced tech developers working alongside literary enthusiasts, fresh college graduates beside industry veterans. The break room conversations were a mix of coding tips and poetry discussions. But success didn't come without challenges. At a major tech conference, a rival CEO publicly questioned whether social justice projects belonged in the industry. Chen stepped up to the microphone and delivered a response that went viral. Innovation isn't just about new gadgets. It's about using technology to amplify voices that deserve to be heard. Amara faced her own battles in the publishing world. At a literary festival, someone suggested their platform was lowering standards by accepting non-traditional writers. She calmly pulled up their sales figures and critical reviews, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Their platform grew faster than anyone expected. Writers who had been told their stories were too different, or wouldn't sell found eager audiences. Readers discovered books that reflected their own experiences for the first time. Traditional publishers started changing their policies, trying to keep up. Chen's mother, who had once been their biggest critic, became one of their strongest supporters. She started a reading club specifically for books from their platform, proudly telling her friends, "My son and daughter-in-law are changing the world, one story at a time." One evening, about a year into their venture, they received an email that brought tears to their eyes. A teenage girl wrote about finding a book through their platform that made her feel seen for the first time. "Before, I thought people like me didn't belong in books," she wrote. "Now I'm writing my own story." That night, Chen and Amara sat on their balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Remember when everyone said we didn't make sense together?" Amara asked, squeezing his hand. Chen smiled, thinking about how far they'd come. "We made sense where it matters, in our hearts and in our dreams." Their company had become more than just a business success. It was living proof that love could build bridges between different worlds. And they were just getting started. 2 years into running their successful platform, Chen and Amara started noticing a change in how people treated them. The same people who had once whispered behind their backs were now trying to get their attention. It was almost funny how quickly things had shifted. One sunny morning, Chen received an unexpected email from his old friend Robert, the same one who'd tried to drag him away from Amara that first night at the coffee shop. "I need your advice," the message read. Robert's tech company was struggling with diversity issues, and now he wanted Chen's help. During their meeting, Robert couldn't quite meet Chen's eyes. "I was wrong," he admitted, stirring his coffee nervously. "About everything. About you, about Amara, about what makes a company successful." "How do you do it?" Chen just smiled, remembering all the times Robert had questioned his choices. Meanwhile, Amara was giving a speech at a major publishing conference, the same event where she'd once been dismissed as Chen's unusual choice of partner. Now, she was the keynote speaker, sharing how their platform had revolutionized the industry. The room was packed, with people sitting in the aisles just to hear her speak. Their success wasn't just about money anymore. They'd created something bigger than themselves. Young couples facing similar prejudices would send them messages saying their story gave them hope. Business students were doing case studies on their company, learning how inclusion could drive innovation. Even Chen's mother's friends, who'd once politely declined their wedding invitation, were now regulars at her book club, specifically requesting titles from their platform. "These stories are opening my eyes," one of them told Amara at a charity event. "I never realized how narrow my worldview was." The transformation was most visible at their company's 3rd anniversary celebration. Their office had grown from a small team to hundreds of employees, each with their own unique background and story. During the party, Chen overheard 2 young interns talking. "Can you believe some people thought they wouldn't last?" One said, "They're literally relationship goals." But success hadn't changed who they were at heart. They still had their regular date nights at the Book Nook Cafe, where Mrs. Patel always saved their favorite spot. They'd added a small free library outside the cafe, filled with books from their platform, giving back to the place where their story began. One day, a prestigious business magazine wanted to do a cover story on them. The photographer suggested they pose in their sleek office, but Chen and Amara had a different idea. They chose to be photographed in the cafe, surrounded by books and coffee cups, looking at each other with the same love that had started it all. During the interview, the reporter asked what they'd say to their critics now. Amara thought for a moment before answering. "We're not interested in proving people wrong," she said. "We're focused on proving love right." Chen squeezed her hand under the table, proud of how far they'd come without losing their way. The article came out with the headline, "Love, Innovation, and the Power of Being Different." It wasn't about revenge or showing up their former critics. Instead, it told the story of how two people stayed true to themselves and changed their industries in the process. That evening, as they walked home hand in hand, they passed a young couple who recognized them from the magazine. The couple looked a bit like they once did, nervous about the world's judgment, but determined to love anyway. Chen and Amara smiled at them, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't about making others eat their words. It's about being so happy that those words don't matter anymore. In their cozy home office, a framed photo hung on the wall. That first picture Chen had taken of Amara grading papers on their old couch. Next to it was their magazine cover. Together, they told the story of a love that didn't just survive society's judgment. It thrived because of who they were, not despite it. 5 years into their marriage, Chen and Amara's impact had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. Their platform wasn't just publishing books anymore. It had become a movement. But the real magic wasn't in the numbers. It was in the lives they were changing. One morning, while having breakfast at their favorite cafe, a young girl approached their table clutching a book. She couldn't have been more than 12, and her hands were shaking slightly. "Your platform published my mom's book," she said. "She always wanted to be a writer, but nobody would give her a chance because English isn't her first language. Now she's teaching other immigrant moms to share their stories too." These moments happened more often now. At tech conferences, people would skip the big-name speakers to hear Chen talk about how diversity drove innovation. His presentations always included real stories from their platform, showing how technology could give voice to the voiceless. Amara's writing workshops, once held in the back of the coffee shop, now filled university auditoriums. But she kept one small, free class at the Book Nook Cafe, remembering how it all started. "Success means nothing if you forget your roots," she often said. Their office had become a landmark of sorts. School groups would tour the building, wide-eyed at the sight of engineers and editors working side by side. The walls were covered with framed book covers, each one a story that traditional publishers had rejected. Next to each cover was a note about how many readers' lives it had touched. Even the biggest critics couldn't ignore their success anymore. The same publishing houses that had turned away their authors now wanted to partner with them. Tech giants that had dismissed their platform as a niche market were scrambling to copy their model. But Chen and Amara stayed true to their vision. Their impact showed up in unexpected places. A popular TV show featured a character reading a book from their platform. Fashion magazines did spreads about workplace style, featuring their diverse office as an example. Business schools added their story to their curricula, teaching students that profit and purpose could go hand in hand. One day, they received an invitation that made them both laugh. They were being honored at the same country club that had once quietly suggested they weren't suitable members. Chen's mother, now one of their biggest champions, proudly wore a dress made by a designer who'd published her memoir through their platform. During the ceremony, a video played showing messages from people they'd helped. There was the teenager who'd found the courage to come out after reading a story that reflected her life. The elderly man who'd finally shared his warm memories through their platform. The young tech worker who'd joined their company because finally I found a place where I could be myself. But perhaps their proudest moment came when they launched their foundation. Instead of just publishing diverse voices, they now provided scholarships, mentoring, and technical training to underserved communities. The Foundation's first event was held at the Book Nook Cafe. They'd bought the building to preserve it, but let Mrs. Patel keep running it her way. Remember when people said we'd never last? Amara asked one evening as they walked home from a Foundation event. Chen pulled her close, thinking about how far they'd come. Their love had created ripples they never expected, changing not just their own lives, but countless others. That night, checking their platform's dashboard, they saw something amazing. Their millionth book had just been published. A cookbook written by a grandmother sharing her family's heritage through recipes. Next to it was a tech tutorial in 5 different languages, written by a self-taught programmer from a rural village. Looking at these stories, Chen and Amara realized something powerful. They hadn't just proved their critics wrong. They'd shown the world a new way to be right. Their love story had become more than just about them. It had become a blueprint for how love, acceptance, and innovation could change the world, one story at a time. 10 years after that rainy night in the coffee shop, Chen and Amara sat in their old favorite spot at the Book Nook Cafe. The place hadn't changed much. Same mismatched chairs, same warm lighting, same smell of coffee and old books. But the world around them had changed dramatically. A young couple sat across the room, clearly on their first date. The girl was plus-sized and wearing bright colors with confidence. Her date was from a wealthy family, judging by his watch and shoes. They looked nervous but happy, stealing glances at each other over their coffee cups. "They remind me of us," Amara whispered to Chen, squeezing his hand. He nodded, noticing how nobody in the cafe was giving the couple strange looks or whispering behind their hands. Times had really changed. Their foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams. They'd funded writing programs in underprivileged schools, coding boot camps for single parents, and technology centers in rural areas. But more importantly, they'd funded dreams. Helping people who'd been told no, their whole lives finally hear yes. The wall behind the cafe's counter, once empty except for a menu, now displayed hundreds of photos. Their wedding picture hung there, alongside snapshots of other couples who'd found love in this same space. Mrs. Patel called it her wall of happy endings. That morning, they'd received news that their platform had been nominated for a Global Innovation Award. But what made them proudest wasn't the nomination. It was the reason. For creating technology that brings humanity together, the announcement read. For proving that love can be the most powerful force for change. Their story had become something of a legend in both tech and publishing circles. But it wasn't the fairy tale version some people tried to make it. It was better. It was real. They'd faced real challenges, shed real tears, and celebrated real victories. Chen's mother, who'd once been their biggest critic, now ran diversity workshops for other parents, struggling to accept their children's choices. Love sees with the heart, she'd tell them, not with society's eyes. She'd even written a book about her journey, published on their platform, of course. The old whispers of "it won't last" had faded away, replaced by success stories from people they'd helped. Like the young programmer who'd created an app connecting homeless people with resources, inspired by their message of using tech for good. Or the writer whose book about growing up different had become required reading in schools. Their office building had a new addition. A museum-like space showcasing the journey of their platform. But among the awards and milestones, they'd included items that told the real story. The coffee cup from their first meeting, Amara's poetry notebook, Chen's old business cards from when he was just another tech CEO. One display always caught visitors' attention. It showed 2 side-by-side magazine covers. The first, from years ago, asked, "Can this unlikely couple change the industry?" The second, more recent one, simply stated, "They did." That evening, as they walked home from the cafe, they passed a bookstore window. Inside, a group of teenagers was having a book club meeting, reading stories from their platform. Through the glass, they could see kids of all backgrounds laughing together, sharing their thoughts, being themselves. "You know what?" Chen said, watching the scene. We didn't just prove them wrong. We proved that love is always right. Amara smiled, remembering all the people who'd said they wouldn't last. Those same people now asked them to speak at events about success and authenticity. Their legacy wasn't just in the company they'd built or the lives they'd changed. It was in every couple who felt brave enough to love despite differences. It was in every person who dared to be themselves in a world that wanted them to conform. As they reached home, the sun setting behind them, they knew their story would keep inspiring others. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. They'd shown the world that true love doesn't need society's permission to thrive. It just needs two hearts brave enough to choose each other again and again.